The other thing that's important that our viewers should appreciate is that the vaccines that we are currently distributing now, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, work very well against the UK variant, the 117. So the better we do at getting vaccine into people's arms as quickly and as expeditiously as possible, that will be another important tool against preventing this additional spike that we want to make sure does not happen with the UK variant.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about vaccines. New research, I know you've seen, from Israel and Canada suggests that even one shot of the Pfizer vaccine can provide 85 to 90% protection. And the UK is delaying some of its second doses up to 12 weeks. Can you explain to Americans why the U.S. isn't adjusting its strategy when millions of them who want a vaccine, number one, can't get one?
Well, Dana, it's a good question, but the answer is that we want to do things based on the science. First of all, there are two scenarios. The one you're talking about the Pfizer giving one dose and having a good degree of protection versus what they're doing in the UK. So let me very briefly explain both. The Pfizer situation, where they gave a vaccine and after a period of time, at 15 to 28 days, they had good protection. What we don't know, and this is the risky business about it, we don't know how durable that effect is going to be. We know for sure that when you give a prime with the Pfizer, followed by a boost 21 days later, that you get a 94 to 95% efficacy. And the difference between the level of antibodies after one dose versus two doses is about tenfold higher. And that is really important because when you have that high a degree comparable to the single dose alone, that's the cushion that you would like to have when you get a variant that isn't as well protected against by the antibodies induced by the vaccine, but you have enough level to be able to prevent at least severe disease. So the science points directly towards continuing with what we know about from the clinical trial. Now, we always keep an open mind to continue to look at data and make decisions based on the evidence and the data. Very quickly, the situation with the UK, a bit different because they're talking about an entirely different vaccine platform. They're talking about a vaccine that was developed using a chimp adenovector as opposed to the mRNA. So they really are not comparable when you talk about the duration that you'll wait before you get the second dose when you're talking about Pfizer or Moderna, which is what we're using here in the United States.
That's a really important explanation because there are a lot of people confused about it. Let's talk about schools. Dr. Fauci, the administration says that schools should open in person as long as they are following the 5 steps from the CDC, like social distancing and wearing masks you talk so much about. Given the science, are schools being too cautious, do you think? And are there schools closed right now that should be open in person?
You know, I mean, obviously, if it's a very difficult situation to get an absolute definitive answer. What the CDC has tried to do is look at the risks that you have and try, if you follow the CDC guidelines, to get the children back in school, at least with hybrid, and maybe even when you actually have an increased spacing with them, that you can get it in what's called a decreased capacity. If you do the 4 or 5 things that the CDC recommends, the bottom line goal that I think people need to remember is that, and I've said this way before the CDC guidelines came out, that the default position is to do whatever you can, as best as you can, to get the children back to school with safety concerns for the children and for the teachers and the educational personnel. And that's what we're trying to do. That's what the president is talking about getting those K-12 schools open within the first 100 days. And that's what we want to do.
Yeah, and so for administrators, superintendents, teachers listening to you right now, what is your advice to them? Should they push the boundaries more than they are? Because there's a lot of frustration out there that the CDC guidelines are, as you explained, they're pretty clear, but the schools are dragging their feet.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, the situation on the ground with the teachers are going to make their decisions and the schools are going to make their decisions. The CDC gives guidelines. If you follow the guidelines, I think it will go a long way to be able to get the children back to school in the safest way as you possibly can. One of the things that comes up is that we'll be doing more and more of, and I think these are things that are important to put into the mix of the consideration, is that teachers clearly should be prioritized among those essential personnel to get vaccinated. I don't believe that it should be a sine qua non that if they're not vaccinated, they should not go back. I believe we should prioritize them and get as many vaccinated as we possibly can. The other thing that is going to relate very, very closely to what you've said just a moment ago is if you look at the number of infections in the community, they're coming down at a very, very rapid, steep decline, which means very quickly as we get into the next week or so, Dana, you're going to see more areas getting into the yellow and then the blue zone as that continuation goes down, which I think will add to the solution to the problem together with the CDC guidelines.
Well, you mentioned the level at which the doses are getting out into the community. The U.S. is administering about 1.5 million doses per day. Everybody agrees that the pace needs to be picked up. Is the federal government doing absolutely everything it can? And how many doses per day would you like to be administering by, say, the end of April?
You know, obviously you want to do more and more. We're at 1.5, we were up to 1.8 a bit ago. Of course you'd like to see it over 2. You'd like to see that happen. So what are we doing? We've been contracting with the companies to get commitments for more doses, number one. The important thing is when you get the doses, getting them into people's arms. And as the president has said multiple times, we're doing community vaccine centers, particularly in those areas where you have demographic groups that are generally underserved. We're putting more vaccines into pharmacies. We're using mobile units to go out into underserved areas to do that. And we're getting what's called vaccinators, people who can actually put the vaccine into people's arms. All of those things are being pushed very, very, I would say, aggressively to make sure we get those vaccines into people's arms as quickly as we possibly can.
Real quick, would you like it to be over 2 million doses a day by the end of April? Is that what you meant?
Of course. I would like it to be that and then some. I mean, obviously, just because you set a goal of what it is, you always want to supersede that goal and get as many as you possibly can. And I believe, Dana, what you're going to start to see as we get more vaccines, you're going to see a lot more vaccines going into people's arms in a much broader way.
So there is some confusion about what that actually means for a person's lifestyle after they are vaccinated. I'll give you an example. My parents have already gotten their second dose. They're fully vaccinated. Does that mean it's okay for them to spend time with their grandchildren who obviously have not been vaccinated? What's your recommendation?
You know, I'm not going to make a recommendation now except to say that these are things that we really do. I mean, literally every day, Dana, we look at that, we look at the data, we look at what's evolving about how many people are getting vaccinated, and there will be recommendations coming out. I don't want to be making a recommendation now on public TV. We want to sit down with the team, take a look at that, and you will be seeing relaxation of some of the stringencies as more and more people get vaccinated.
Well,
I promise you that, but I don't want to really do it right now.
Well, just to make it personal, I mean, you've been very open about the fact that you've been skipping holidays with your family. You're fully vaccinated. Are you seeing your family?
Right now, not yet. Not yet. I mean, I would look forward to it within a reasonable period of time as the rest of my family gets vaccinated. I mean, obviously, I'm with my wife every day.
Right.
She has gotten her first dose, will soon get her second dose. But my children, when they get vaccinated, obviously, I look forward to seeing them. And I'm sure that by that time, recommendations will come out to guide us in a more precise way.
You and the president have suggested that we'll approach normality toward the end of the year. What does normal mean? Do you think Americans will still be wearing masks, for example, in 2022?
You know, I think it is possible that that's the case. And again, it really depends on what you mean by normality. If
right,
normality
that's what I want you to
is
define
exactly the way Yeah. No, Dana, it's important because if normality means exactly the way things were before we had this happen to us, I mean, I can't predict that. I mean, obviously, I think we're going to have a significant degree of normality beyond what the terrible burden that all of us have been through over the last year, that as we get into the fall and the winter by the end of the year, I agree with the president completely that we will be approaching a degree of normality. It may or may not be precisely the way it was in November of 2019, but it'll be much, much better than what we're doing right now.